the shadow of Giant Stadium that's like 10 minutes that away at Anthony's Comic Book Art Daily Review. Now, but this is kind of a special family review of the Greek, the legend of Jimmy the Greek. My father, his grandfather. What did your grandfather do?
He was like a sports broadcaster. He was like a talk show.
Sports broadcaster. Well, you were right the first time. All right, so there's things that I'm very proud about my dad about, and there's the other things I'm not so proud about. You know, it's like he was a complicated man. Frank DeFord gave his eulogy at the funeral, and he's like, well, there's no doubt about your father. He lived. And he did live his life. He lived his life in a way that, sort of an unfiltered way that it could benefit you or hurt you, depending on which side of that filter you are on. So, believe me, I know. Now, so this is stuff that I have consigned to the Heritage Auction House, the sports auction house. There were different guys than what I'm usually dealing with Nick over there, and so this is the Jimmy the Greek section for the next platinum auction. They got some really great stuff, like, you know, game-worn jerseys, game-used bats, a lot of Babe Ruth balls, and then there's a section of the personal stuff that I gave him that were possessions of my father, clothing that he wore on screen. So I want to go over this. These are the letters of providence that I'm signing for Heritage to use with the items, and I can, you know, let it be known on this day in December that the providence of these items are hereby confirmed by the Anthony Snyder. Right, kid?
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool, you know, that I'm signing the letters of providence, and let's go over them. All right, so this piece right here, this is his horse racing tie. And I don't think there was anything my dad loved more than the horses and racing horses. And he owned a couple horses here and there that actually ran at Belmont and Aqueduct. And this was the tie that he would always wear when he was covering the horse race events that CBS would broadcast. And I remember one time he picked this race 1, 2, 3, 4. He picked it all right in a row, and he, you know, it wasn't just him picking it. He had action on it. All right, so he was the happiest guy you'd ever seen in your life because he picked that race 1, 2, 3, 4. Because, you know, I don't know if there was. I know there's trifectas on each race, but there's a superfecta with the 4 horses, right? So this is the tie that is, I believe it's Hermes, and had horseshoes and such like that. So my old man would wear that on air every time they did a horse race on CBS. Now this piece was in his office forever, as long as I can remember. It's a 1968 Green Bay Packers team signed football that he owned forever. He had it for, I mean, just ever, as long as I can remember. He always had this on his office. And it's, the coolest thing about it was that it says Super World's Champions on it. You know, it was like they hadn't invented the Super Bowl yet. So that is, you know, up in the auction, and that's a piece that, you know, my dad owned forever and was it part of his, you know, collection. Now this is, well, you know what I should do? Jimmy the Greek Snyder collection. He was the most famous and charismatic figure in the history of sports gambling, the first nationally recognized advocate for an industry that had lingered in the shadows of the athletic world since its very beginning. From the world headquarters of wagering, the city of Las Vegas, Jimmy the Greek ruled the sports book as a benevolent king, courting his share of controversy along the way, but clearly earning his throne as the sporting world's most skilled prognosticator. So much about the life of the Wizard of Odds, and this was a piece of art that was done for him as the Wizard of Odds, and it had the scarecrow with basketball and football, the Cowardly Lion, and hockey, and the the Wicked Witch of the West, and the oh, this is a great piece. Wally Niebart. But my dad was, always very into getting the pieces that people did. So this was the magazine that it was done for, the Argosy, which was kind of a men's magazine at the time, and his write-up, The Wonderful Wizards Betting Odds for 1974. What a great year! That's that same year I bet that I bought a giant size one, Jamie.
Oh.
Yeah. So, staying with this, let me finish this. So much about the life of the Wizard of Odds feels prescient in the current climate of American sports. What's prescient mean?
That one's out of my vocabulary, I'm afraid.
Relevant, having to do with today. It's like he was ahead of his time. This is the stuff he was doing, and is now of the present, where he was doing it. He started doing it in the 50s and 60s, and then became nationally famous in the 70s.
Wow.
Okay? Yeah, he was a very famous person. Very famous. Because he was the first guy to pick games on TV.
Oh.
Now, if you watch football with me, which you don't, because you're an artiste and love Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy stuff, he was the very first guy to pick the games, and now they have a pre-game show with like 6 or 10 guys on that show that are all picking games, and then the actual pre-game show where another 5 or 6 guys are, it's like 15 people are picking games that, even the girl, the eye candy on the show is picking games, and it's like, really? Have you ever made a bet in your life? Well, that's another matter. But it hits too close to home. It's like, what, if you never bet the rent money on a football game and weren't going to be able to pay the rent if you didn't win, then you shouldn't be on TV picking games. Okay? All right. So much about the life of the Wizard of Odds feels prescient in the current climate of American sports. From the shifting political ties we see in the NFL and NASCAR, to the relocation of the Raiders franchise to a shiny new stadium just off the Las Vegas Strip. Now that is a long story, because Al Davis and my dad were best friends. After the Super Bowl win in New Orleans, after they beat Vermeil's Eagles, we were with him at dinner. That's how close my dad and Al were. And when Al was trying to move to Los Angeles, and he did move to Los Angeles, much to the over the rulings of Pete Rozelle. Pete Rozelle and him didn't get along because, if Pete wasn't the commissioner of the NFL, Al Davis was going to be back in the day, So they were rivals. So Rozelle really didn't want Al Davis to be able to move his franchise, and because that was, if you moved from Oakland to Los Angeles, you're talking about moving from a tertiary market, not even a secondary market, to the second market in the United States. There's the New York market, and then there's the Los Angeles market, and then Chicago area. You know, it's like, so that was the number two TV market in the country that didn't have a football team. And Rozelle knew that, you know, if he pushed through and he wanted to put a new franchise there, what possibly with him owning it. So, or hand-picked ownership to move into that market, because that market valued, you know, increased the value, enhanced the value of the Raiders. You know, I have no idea, but, you know, tremendously. Because one of the big things about that market was he wanted to do pay-per-view in the Los Angeles market. So this is all stuff that I absorbed from being around my dad back in the day, okay? So that was a huge thing. But Las Vegas, I know my dad would have loved to try to get him to move to Vegas, but the political climate of organized, legalized gambling at the time forbid it. It was never going to happen. But now it's become a situation where it's eminently more accessible and legalized and accepted and part of it, that, oh yeah, well, you know, I'm gonna, you know, put a little something down on it through DraftKings or whichever, and, you know, have a little action on the game, and that's considered part of the enjoyment of the sports. Well, again, back in the day, Pete Rozelle in the NFL office didn't want my dad to pick games by the numbers. They did not. He had to say, you know, by a field goal, by a touchdown, but they might miss that extra point. You know, he would try to talk around it with Brent as they were breaking down the games and his board, you know. And my old man had the board where it had, you know, quarterback and intangibles, team speed and matchups, and the check marks. You know, the check marks were always cool. So this is the second installment of the personal collection, decades in the making, and Heritage Auctions is proud to make it available to the collecting world. Each lot in this collection is consigned by Jimmy the Greek Son and will be accompanied by his letter of provenance. And what's that word? Provenance? Provenance. Not providence, provenance. Okay. So this piece right here is something else that I'm proud about with my father. Okay. This is his Emmy Award, 78-79 certificate, because it was an ensemble award for live coverage of a sporting event that my dad was the color commentator for the Ali Spinks fight. One. I know it was one because I met Ali on that occasion, and I remember my dad saying, "I don't know if you guys are watching the same fight as I am, but Spinks is winning," and he did win. So that was the beginning of the end for Muhammad and his illustrious career, really. So this is the Emmy Award. We've had this in the family for many years, and I'm making it available to the collectors in the marketplace. You know, if you're a boxing fan or, you know, celebrity type thing, that's it. Now this is a cool piece because this was given to my father from another great friend of his, Mr. George Steinbrenner. Now, Mr. Steinbrenner is very famous for being the boss of the New York Yankees. Now, but on the other side of it, not so famously, is that they ran the New York Racing Association, for the horses. I mean, so they were big horse people, the Steinbrenners. I think his son-in-law was the head of the New York Racing Association basically until I believe he got sick. But this was presented. It's a 1985 bronze horse racing statue gifted by George Steinbrenner to Jimmy the Greek, and on it says "Happy Birthday, Jimmy." You know, basically he got along with Mr. Steinbrenner really well, and that was an amazing relationship. it was a kind of relationship that I never went to a Yankee game where I didn't sit in the owner's box until the 90s, you know, until my dad had long passed away and Mr. Steinbrenner was gone as well. I grew up in Vegas. And we got the Dodger broadcasts with Vin Scully. So I got to hear the best announcer in the history of sports doing the radio coverage for the Dodgers. And when the Dodgers, with the Garvey Say and the Davey Lopes and Rick Monday and Steve Yeager and Don Sutton and that team went to the World Series and played the Yankees with, you know, of course, Reggie Jackson in that 3 home run game and all that. We were at those games. We were at those games as I was a Dodger fan, but we were with the Steinbrenners. So that's a cool memory that I have, from the Steinbrenner days. And then when we moved to the East Coast, when my dad got the job with CBS, that's when I kind of transitioned, like it was kind of handed the baton between me being a Dodger fan to being a Yankee fan, and in this area, living in Manhattan, going to Yankee games. So these pieces were another one of those times where I actually got to be a ball boy at a game, where Elvin Hayes, the Big E, gave me these 2 pieces. One was an actual practice jersey from the Washington Bullets, and one was just something he had around. I don't know. It had his name on it, Elvin Hayes. But Elvin Hayes, I mean, if he isn't a Hall of Famer, he probably should be, because he was an incredible scorer. The Big E was the College Player of the Year, an NBA champion, a 12-time All-Star, and a member of the NBA's 50th anniversary all-time team. Yeah, he is a Hall of Famer. So, and I remember him giving me these because I was the Greek son and I was a ball boy at the game, and that was a nice memory too. So we're gonna put those are available. Now, what else do we have here? Here's a couple jerseys. Well, here's more than a couple jerseys. Here's 3 jerseys that I collected along the way, like being at games. And let's speed this up a little bit. Oh, this was the football that was the on-set Super Bowl 21 football for the NFL Today show. So that was the football that they had on set, and as a prop, it's a set decoration basically. But I don't know if I jacked it or but I got to keep it as a souvenir. What else is fun and interesting here? Well, this is important to me. They forgot to say on this one that this was given to him. These are related, okay? So, my dad helped create the World Series of Poker. He coined the phrase, World Series of Poker, because he wanted to get the best poker players in Vegas together, or nationally, and they would buy in what they call freeze-out tournaments, play different games. Play, Texas Hold'em, play Omaha High-Low, play low ball. Those guys loved low ball. That was their favorite game. Where you made the lowest hand possible instead of the highest hand possible. Deuce to 7 was the highest, the best hand in low ball. So no ace, and you don't have a straight. So a 7 low, 7 perfect is what would be called the best hand in that game. So Mr. Benny Binion owned the Horseshoe, and with his son Ted, they invented the World Series of Poker. And if you go on YouTube for the 1973 World Series of Poker, my dad shot it. He hosted it. He wrote, he wrote his dialogue, and basically was the first guy to ever shoot poker. Now this is something I'm really proud of, because you know, at a certain time in my life, I tried to go out there on the professional circuit and be a pro poker player, and I learned how hard it was. And I have a story. I was talking to Doyle Brunson that my dad actually wrote the foreword for his Super System poker book, which was the first poker book ever published that Doyle wrote. My dad wrote the foreword. So, and my dad at that time, he was Mr. Las Vegas. All these poker players, they were unknowns. They would never been on camera. They didn't know any, how to, my dad was a charismatic guy in that day, and he was the Greek. He was the famous one. He was the known one. He was the PR director of the Caesar's Palace. He was the PR director of the Tropicana and promoting Las Vegas. And one of his genius ideas was trying to promote poker. So I gave the file to the 1973 World Series of Poker, his correspondence file and his notes, and then Puggy Pearson won, who was a good friend of my dad. And you see in the film that, they all just sat down. There was no poker tournament at the time. They didn't play tournaments. They played freeze-outs. Now, what a freeze-out was, it was Teddy sat there, collected the $10,000 from each player, $10,000, and gave them a stack of high society, a rack of black. And that's what they were playing with. They were playing with casino chips for value. Not tournament chips that say no value. They were playing for a rack of black each. So I think there was 13 guys in that World Series, and it was the first one where they just played the freeze out. They called it a freeze out because the word poker tournament really didn't exist yet, and it was a freeze out in a way that it was just winner take all, baby. That winner got $130,000. So that was Puggy Pearson. He won at the time. Amarillo Slim won in that day and age. He won a couple of times, and then he would go on Johnny Carson, and he was an ambassador for poker because of his Texas witticisms. He was a funny guy. He was telegenic, and Johnny liked having him on. Now, the other part of this that I want to relate to this is this hat was a cowboy hat that Benny gave to my father. This was gifted from Benny Binion, and I need to make sure that they have that in the literature here of the catalog. But I don't think they do. No, they don't. So Benny always wore a cowboy hat because he was from Texas, and people from Texas always wore a cowboy hat back then. Bear in mind, if you walk down the streets in downtown Las Vegas, and when I was a kid, there were people coming in off the range, still carrying 6-shooters on their leg, like open carry pistols. So that's anything else I want to really hit on here? Well, this is fun because it's like a scribble sheet of his betting and a canceled check. So it's got a good signature and a page of his bets and odds and such that he was making for, like, that was what his day was like when he was betting on games. And then he'd track like how much he was up, how much he was down. So that one's in the auction, available with the canceled check. And I got to find a lot. When I went through his stuff, I found a lot of canceled checks. Unfortunately, they were like to Churchill Downs for like $7,000-8,000. So he would be going for $7,000-8,000 a day at Churchill Downs in the early 80s. So that was a ton of money back then. Anyway, so one last thing I want to talk about here is here's a screen worn with the badge, CBS badge, suit that he used to wear. I put it together from my memory and from pictures of a screen worn suit with the CBS badge. So, and I don't have any more of these CBS badges. I gave them up for the pieces in the auction. So that, they put together this is where I guess Joe Namath was coming off the field for Super Bowl III, which they had picked. He was very famous for having made the Colts a 16 point favorite, but Joe cracked them and won the game, and that was a big upset in Super Bowl history. And it was the biggest upset, I think, until the Giants cracked the Patriots in Glendale, because they were about a 10-point underdog. And I was actually at that Super Bowl, and I was very happy about that outcome. This is a CBS Sports hat, back for the day. This is his autobiography that he wrote in the 70s. That's my beautiful mother. You can see where I get my looks from, and you can see where he gets his looks from. Look, he looks like her side of the family, doesn't he? You have the look of your grandmother.
Thank you.
Oh, she was beautiful. She was absolutely beautiful. Photogenic. And then this, oh man. This, I remember this. I was 10 years old. It's a family portrait. This is my brother Jamie that passed away from cystic fibrosis. This is my childhood dog Napoleon. And then our dog, we got a miniature poodle and named her Josephine after him. And this is me hamming it up for the camera. And this is me hamming it up for the camera today. What happened? Yeah, that was 46 years ago, Jamie. It's crazy, huh?
Yeah.
You know what was funny? We were at the Duke Zoo for Plants. What do you call a zoo for plants? Zooarium. I don't know. Gardens, the Duke Gardens. And when I met your mother, that's where we went to take our first photos.
Oh, fun.
When I was a photographer, and I met her as an aspiring model, and we went there to the Zoo for Plants, and we did pictures. And her first pictures when she was not much older than you. She was 20 years old. So the last thing I want to touch on, guys, and gals, is this is the Legend of Jimmy the Greek that was produced by ESPN's 30 for 30. I helped them for about a month on this. I gave them all the physical stuff and the laydowns, all the personal possessions and all that. And I'm in this for about 10 minutes, basically, and then I'm on the extras too. And then Dan Rather's in it, and Brent Musburger, and Phyllis George. Phyllis was a great lady. I was so sad to hear that she passed away. My dad and her didn't get along because my dad had this horrible history with her husband because he didn't feel like he had gotten paid in this deal that he had done with him. Her husband was the owner of Kentucky Fried Chicken before it went public. But anyway, when I saw her at the screening at the Paley Center for this, I was like, and she met my wife, and my wife was a big hit with with her and the producers of the show, and Irv Cross, who's a really sweet guy, great guy, never had a problem with my dad at all. And Fritz Mitchell, who directed this piece and made this film, started out as an intern at CBS Sports. So that was cool, that full circle thing, Oh man, 8 years ago. 8 years ago. So, one of my ambitions is to pump up the autobiography that was done in the 70s with interviews from people that knew him and have good stories, like Mike Francesa, who started out as a ghostwriter for his column, and started out with my dad. So I'd really love to talk to Francesca about that. But we're very proud of this because it really tells my dad's story in a way that is very digestible to people everywhere, here and now. Now, Jamie, let's check in with you on your commission. Jimmy the Greek's grandson,
Hey.
and handsomeness, because he favors his grandmother's side of the family, is doing commissions here for $20. This is an original character sketch. I mean, original character, and his sketch of that, right? Your design art. So he's writing. Tell him a little something about it.
This is the protagonist of my book. Still working on the first draft. It's a revenge story. She's trying to find the crusaders that murdered her parents.
All right, sounds dramatic. So that's an original sketch of an original character, but we're also doing commissions for him on the website. If you email me, say, hey, I'd like to get a Batman, or I'd like to get a Spider-Man, or whatever your favorite character is, they're $20. So that helps support his art supplies and getting him more proficient at doing commissions and doing character work as he progresses. And you're taking 2 classes at the Kubert School right now, right?
1 class at Kubrick School, 1 class at Korea.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I started doing some online classes at the Kubert School. We're still going to go and do a tour of the Kubert School. We got to hook up with Anthony Marquez about that. The owner of the Kubert School is doing such a great job there. And that's something we're still going to do our shooting the Rob Liefeld forgery very soon. We're getting that together. And I want you guys, you sports guys, to look at this December 10th through the 13th for some of these mementos of my father's career. And I really appreciate you tuning in and letting me talk about it. This was kind of like the way I wanted to talk about this stuff today, and show, this is an original cartoon. Fellas, I've got terrible news. Jimmy the Greek just picked us to win the NCAA championship. That's hilarious. Now this one was really cool. I have the what I think to be an art. I have the Johnny Hart sent this art to my dad. We have a system based on free enterprise. What is yours based on? This was a running gag, and it was Jimmy the Greek. And my dad loved stuff like that. So but he had a sense of humor. He would ask this artist for, this one that made fun of him, or this one that kind of, glorified him, or so to speak. And anytime that somebody did a piece like this, he always wanted to get it. So, yeah, that was his narcissism. But, you had to be a narcissist to, progress through life the way he did. He was a son of an immigrant. He was Greek speaking. They lived on the, basically the greaseball side of town. There was the Protestants, there was the Catholics, and there was the Mediterraneans, and then there was the blacks. It's like, so everybody was segregated back in 1920s Ohio. It was Steubenville, Ohio. So, he came up out of, I'm not going to say nothing, because his dad was a small business owner. He had a grocery, but he rose up from that. He and Dean Martin came out of Steubenville at the same time. They were best friends, and that's saying a lot. That those 2 guys could come out of a town like that, a steel mill town, and become Dean, one of the most famous entertainers in the history of the world. If you look back at his career, oh my God, he could do it all, and sing, act, the roasts, all that stuff. And my dad became the most famous sports broadcaster possibly ever. Now, I want to wrap that up and say thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. This has gone, longer than I usually do, but this is important to me. I hope this auction does well for this stuff. because I still need to cover some of the advance they gave me. So I'm Anthony Snyder with Anthony's Comic Book Art, and today I'm Jimmy the Greek's son, and this is Jimmy the Greek's grandson. It's a family show, and so keep calm and keep collecting.